most of the things that you are worried about when it comes to sex, your performance, your penis size, your body shape, the way you're performing oral sex, your left boob is bigger than your right boob, or whatever the things you're worried about have like literally zero to do with any sort of pleasure or satisfaction. And people will tell you they have the best sex. It was never because of like the shape of the penis, all these things. It's about connection. It's about intimacy. It's about feeling safe. It's about experimenting. It's about really being with someone where you want them to have the most pleasure and they want the same for you.
Have you looked at how much sex people are having in the modern world? Are we having more or less sex than previous generations?
Apparently, we're having less sex than previous generations. Media can't get enough of these studies that they're doing that people are not having sex, young people aren't having sex. And it turns out people in relationships are having the same amount of sex that they've always had, but younger generations are not doing it.
Interesting. That's one of the first things that I learned when starting to look at this, which is almost all sex. It's something like 95% of sexual activity within any given year occurs only within relationships. So people think about the singletons that are spraying it all over the place, and it's not. It's the people that are in relationships that have almost all of the sex. It's
true. And that's been that way for a long time. It's just that, like you said, but people aren't just out there dating as much, or they're not having sex as much, and they're just more, finding satisfaction elsewhere and not prioritizing it, which is really interesting.
Well, it's less of a sex problem than it is a singleton problem in that case. What have you looked at to do with the relationship between having sex and people's happiness? Do people that have regular access to physical touch, do they live longer? Are they happier in life?
All the things. Everyone who has more touch, more sex, more connection are definitely happier in life. They report having more pleasure, more life satisfaction. They live longer. Touch is a requirement. It really is. There's something called skin hunger, and that's a real condition that we need physical touch. We require it. And as animals, like we want to cuddle, we want to touch. And I think a lot of times we talk about sex, but something that I always talk about is like sex is just part of it. I think a lot of times we think we're craving sex, and how we define sex is like penetration, but really we're craving intimacy. And that could be holding hands. It could be kissing, cuddling, massage, but sometimes if you are feeling lonely, and we know we also have a loneliness epidemic and a sex epidemic apparently, but just getting a massage and holding a puppy, we require that as humans to thrive, and it boosts our serotonin, our moods, everything.
I remember reading during the pandemic about women who were touch starved or touch isolated, trying to find a way to not risk COVID, but to also be able to get a hug off a friend or off a stranger. And there were these support groups for women on the internet who hadn't touched another person for ages, and it was affecting their mental health.
Yeah, no, I'm sure I didn't hear about that one, but I did have a massage therapist call into my show during the pandemic saying there was all these women coming to him, and they were like, asking for like a little something extra, a really happy ending. And he had never had that before. Yeah.
Dear.
What a time to be alive.
These are the real costs of the pandemic. I don't want to know about GDP and national debt. I want to know about the masseuses that have to do happy endings. That's what we're about.
He wasn't complaining, but...
Well, yeah, maybe. One of the other things, I'm British, right? So our sensibilities when it comes to opening up and talking about sex are basically non-existent. We're way too stiff upper lipped and stoic for that to be the case. What's happened in your experience over the since you began researching this, around the conversation of talking about sex? Like, are people more open or less open? Are we having a resurgence of new Puritans at the moment?
It's a great question, because when I started this almost 20 years ago, there really wasn't anybody talking about sex. You could really just point to Dr. Ruth, and, she was in her 90s now, and she started talking about sex probably in the 80s. And there wasn't a lot of resources. People weren't talking about it online. Now, since then, there's definitely more people. There's more information available online. There's more people, podcasters talking about it. I was definitely the first podcaster talking about it. However, so there's two things happening. Yes, we're more open and we're comfortable talking about sex, and you can buy a vibrator at, Walmart. And we see more nudity on television, and we're just more open, right? Sexually, there's more TV shows with the word sex in the title on Netflix, which wasn't even a thing 5 years ago. However, what hasn't changed at all is that we still live in a very puritanical society where we are just truly not comfortable getting into the specifics around sex. I mean, if you look at what's happening in America with Roe v. Wade, so now we're and then we're limiting sex education. Only 17 states require sex ed to be medically accurate in America, but yet we're rolling back rights too. So it's really pretty backwards that people just don't have the information, but yet there's a proliferation of porn. So now we have all this pornography without sex education. And that's just lethal, to be honest, because we know porn is not real. It's fiction. Someone wrote a script and it's not how you accurately have sex. So there's a crisis in that sense that, sex is ubiquitous on the internet, and you can see it on your phone when you're 8 years old. Kids are seeing porn, but yet they're going out in the world having sex and there's not information. So it's not. So in a way, we're in pretty much the same place where people still don't have information about pleasure, which is what I talk about a lot. And I got to be honest that even when I was, and my publisher is probably going to kill me, and but this is what it made me think of that. So I have a major publisher, my book's coming out, Smart Sex. I don't know how to say this, but they really came at me in December and were like, we can't have sex in the title because it's going to get buried in the algorithms. And I was like, I've been doing my show for 20 years to make sex more accessible. I have to put sex in the title. It's I'm Sex with Emily. So this is what we're up against, right? We live in a world we are not as safe and comfortable talking about sex.
Right. So if it's not the sensibility that we have and the concern that everyone has about opening up about sex, it's getting keywords hidden on Google's search algorithm. Okay. What is it? Have you ever looked at why humans are nervous about talking about sex? Just generally, why is that adaptive? Why would that be an evolutionarily adaptive reason?
Well, because evolutionarily speaking, I would say that there was a time when we weren't. But if we go back about 500,000 years, we look at religion's impact on sexuality, and we look at the change in women's roles and men's roles, and how sex sort of became more about procreation, and women became the property of men, and we started to police sexuality. And so we didn't have a lot of, still didn't have information about it. And so I think if we look at modern day, why we're not, evolutionary speaking, I think there's been a lot of change in it. But even if you go back to Adam and Eve, which some people say that story isn't even real, Eve was blamed and shamed for her body and what she did to Adam, making him take a bite of the apple. So since the beginning of the time, I would say there's been some shame around our genitals. But if we fast forward to modern day, I can tell you that we weren't even talking about sex in America until about 50 years ago, right? Till the Kinsey Institute started doing research around it, and in the late 50s. But so it's still a pretty new field. And even that, they still, even just yesterday, I have a friend who works at Kinsey Institute, said they were being defunded. So anyway, there's that. There's also just shame. I have to tell you that there is so much shame around our bodies and talking about sex. And I do think it goes back to more conservative environments. We don't have information about it. If you grew up in a household where you were told it was wrong to have sex in marriage, or unless you were married, and that sex is only for procreation, and so I think a lot of it is shame, and we haven't normalized it, that our parents don't want to talk to kids don't want to hear their parents talk about it. And a lot of misinformation just leaves it shrouded in mystery.
One thing that is interesting to add into that is that I'm not convinced that the modern world is as sex negative. We've got kids that are now 16 years old who were born in 2007. 2007 wasn't pitch burning, flag carrying, when was gay marriage legalized? Not too long after that.
Right.
So it seems like a relatively sex positive world, yet young people still have a lot of reticence about talking about their sex. So, there may be some of the older people, the older generation, perhaps my parents' generation, your parents' generation, who were influenced by that conservative thinking. I'm not sure. I wonder whether there's just something more embedded. I wonder whether it's something about, I don't know, the same way that you don't talk to your friends all the time about your bowel movements or about your athlete's foot or about like your chronic flatulence or something. I wonder whether there's just something kind of sacred about, or not even sacred, just shameful, inherently shameful. And I guess what you're trying to do, opening up the conversation about sex, normalizing it, making it the sort of thing that people don't need to blush and look at the floor when they discuss.
Well, I think you're right. I think there is some shame out. Like, I don't want it. There's just some things that we don't want to talk about. But if I didn't have an example of in the Dutch countries, like in the Netherlands, it's the only place that I know of and that we've studied where they actually they start teaching sex education when kids are very, very young, like even when they're pre-verbal, meaning they name the body parts. They'll say those are your toes and your knees and your thighs and your vagina, your vulva, your penis. Whereas in America, we might skip right over and be like your knees, your thighs, your stomach, or your private parts. So at a young age, they start to normalize that. They name the parts. They talk about consent when it comes to touching, like at a young age too. They'll like say this is your body and you have the right to have people touch it or not. And in their sex education, which they have every single year as kids get older, like literally from kindergarten to graduation, they have sex education, but where in America it's basically don't get pregnant, don't get an STI, basically don't have sex. It's all very mechanical and fear-based. In these Dutch countries, they talk about pleasure and they talk about orgasm and they talk about, like consent and asking for what you want. And I think that this lack of information here where we don't really talk about the female orgasm or there's like an orgasm gap or there's all these missing things that there's just a lot of missing information here where we don't talk about how it can be pleasurable and great. But again, when you look at these countries, they show that the pregnancy rate is lower. The kids talk to their parents about sex. The parents will say, well, if you had sex, I hope it was pleasurable. I hope you had an orgasm. Like that might seem so cringy to everybody who's listening to this, but that's just because of the way we were socialized. How much better is it to be in a free open world? Like your parents are like, you're playing on a soccer league. They're like, how was your match? Did you win? Did you play it? How was your sex? Did you have pleasure? Cool. Did you use protection? Amazing. What's for dinner? Like, why does it have to be so shameful? Right? Because the problem with that is that we walk around having pain, faking orgasms, like I did for many, many years. 80% of women have pain during sex at some point in their life. Some women always have pain, but they never talk about it. We're like, well, I guess we got to have periods and give birth and have pain during sex. There's an orgasm gap where men have orgasms in 99% of sexual situations and women do not. Only 20% of women have sex during penetrative sex. Women and men take between like 6 and 8 minutes to orgasm and women take between 20 and 40 minutes. So like there's all these ways that if sex is really supposed to be this pleasurable collaborative effort where we're all having a good fucking time, then it'd be so great to have information about it so we could actually do it in a way that feels good. So this is where the disconnect is. Like, yes, people are having sex or they're apparently not having sex, but even when they are having sex, I think the quality of sex hasn't changed. And that is my mission, to be honest. My mission is to get people to have better sex and everyone gets to decide what that looks like. And I don't even think that we know what that looks like. And so that's what my mission is all about and what my book is about, that I just like, literally, it was like, I want people to know what's on the menu and what sex even can look like. And here's a foundation for knowing if you're sexually healthy and what you need to know. And then you get to decide, like, here's everything. Take what you like, leave the rest. But I think right now, since there's so much disparate information, we're just walking around like, why is sex so great at the beginning of the relationship, but it's not great 6 months in or a year in? Like, no, let's just fucking deal with it and have information and have a lot more pleasure in our lives. That's what I'm all about.
It is strange that we exist in a world that's got more information than ever before. We've managed to eradicate diseases. We've mastered the climate. We can fly across countries. We can do all sorts of things, communicate. And yet the quality of sex, by the doctor, as she says, doesn't seem to have improved. The quality of our lives have improved by pretty much every other objective metric that you care about. I wonder whether part of it is this sort of current, it is like a puritanical world where people are focused so much just on work, and pleasure or enjoyment feels lazy. It feels like unnecessarily luxurious. You probably don't have time for it. It's at the bottom of your list of priorities.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's exactly it. And that's what I mean. This is my work is basically about pleasure, getting people to prioritize pleasure and not put conditions on pleasure. Like it's only once I work out, can I have dessert? Or once I check everything off my list, can I go do something that's fun for me? And my hypothesis that really that pleasure is productive. That the more pleasure you have, the more pleasure you work into your life, your schedule, your planning, as you're planning your workouts or your times with friends or all the other things you're prioritizing, put pleasure on the map, put pleasure on your calendar, like whatever that is. And I actually have in my book a pleasure percentage that I help people figure out like their pleasure formula of how many, if you look at it, there's like a formula of how many minutes in the day, how many minutes in the week, and you divide it up and you figure out like all the formula literally for how you can insert pleasure into your life and like look ahead and be like, these are the things that make me feel good. Because otherwise they just don't happen, to your point. You're just like, I don't deserve it. I didn't do enough. And then next thing you know, like weeks go by, months go by. You're like, when was the last time I did something that was just fun for me? What is fun? Like, what is pleasure really? Yeah, we work so much. We all work so hard, and we're on our phones, we're on our lap, like we're always available.
But we're not scheduling that pleasure time. Okay. No. You said before something that's an interesting question, which is, why is sex so exciting at the beginning of a relationship and why does it wane over time? What have you come to believe about that?
Well, this is our biology speaking. There's something called the honeymoon phase, which is a real biological condition. It lasts anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. And what they show is that, when something's new and exciting and the novelty of being someone new, we actually have looked at the brainwave patterns of people falling in love or in lust. And it looks like the people on cocaine. Like if you look at people falling in love and lust, it's the same exact thing. You've got the dopamine, the serotonin. It's the most delicious cocktail of feel-good hormones flying around, and we feel amazing. But just like everything that feels great, it also has to come down, right? It comes up, it comes down. And so then it stagnates. And then we're like, okay, well, I'm not riding the waves of the fumes of the newness and excitement. What do we do about it? How do we keep it going? And what we do crave after this period is, if we start the sex start to flatline, is we do crave like novelty and newness and variety. And so, but that's why it happens. And then that's when people usually come to find me, when we're like, okay, now what do we do? And since we don't have a lot of information about sex and we're not comfortable talking about sex and we compartmentalize sex, we really do. We kind of put it over there. We're like, I'm going to just close my eyes, get naked, and hope for the best. Hope it's good. And then when it's not good, we don't know what the fuck to do. So I help people kind of figure out what they can do to make it, keep it hot, keep it interesting, keep it fresh, and keep it going.
Pivoting from that, I think it's the passionate to the companionate. Those are the two systems in Eve Sykes speak. And you have the one that is all-encompassing. You're concerned about why they've waited so long to text you back. You can't wait to see them again. It ruins your day because you can't not think about them. And then things do pivot, but they pivot for an adaptive reason, right? That you go from mate retention to family building. You're no longer focused as much on trying to be obsessive to make sure that they're invested in you. You're both invested in each other. And now we need to move forward. But I imagine that given that pleasure is something that needs to be prioritized, given that it's something that determines our quality of life, it makes us live longer, et cetera, these two things almost kind of work against each other. So one of the most common dynamics I think that people will see, especially those that are in relationships, are sex becoming routinized. The type of sex that you have, when you have it, where you have it, the way you have it, how long it lasts, the things you do. What are your pieces of advice for people who feel like sex is the same as a trip to McDonald's now? I know my order, I know what to expect, I know how long the wait's going to be, and I know what I'm going to feel like after I've finished. What should you do?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to, if you're in a relationship, is to start to talk to your partner about sex. Really, my whole thing is communication is a lubrication. And the more that we talk about sex, the better sex we're going to have. So really, it's finding out what what kind of sex do we like having? What's interesting to us? Like, let's do a little bit of research, a little bit of digging, a little bit of reflective, talking about what has worked in our relationship and what hasn't. So you can talk about, for example, okay, so here's the thing. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the majority of people in long-term relationships haven't really talked about their sex life in a way that is useful, in a way that can help them answer this question of what can we do to keep it hot and interesting. And so, I actually in this book, Smart Sex, I write about these 5 pillars, which are sort of the foundation and the tools of the way that people can check in with themselves and understand their own sexuality. Because when I started writing this book, it was like, okay, I've got 20 years of knowledge. Here's all my best tips and tricks. And then I thought, I'm like, everybody wants a quick fix when it comes to sex. Like, what's the toy? What's the lube? What's the sex position? And I give that. Like, I give that in droves in Smart Sex. I literally put everything in there. But then I realized that people really need an organizing principle around sex. I want people to understand that there are 5 pillars, and that's going to help them understand who they are as a sexual being. They don't see the relationship between their sexual being, their emotional well-being, their mental well-being, their physical well-being, their spirituality, their self-confidence or self-acceptance, all the things. So there's all these factors that come into play. So when I tell couples to talk about their sex life, there's a lot of different things going on. There's all the tips and tricks, like try this position, try this toy. But then there's what's going on with the individual, with you. And I really feel like what I set out as people, what I help people do is understand who they are sexually, so then they can relate to a partner and they can figure out these like 5 pillars together. For example, the first one is embodiment, right? How in our body are we during sex? Do I know what makes me feel when I'm having sex with someone? Am I present? Am I feeling my partner's body, my hands? Do I, feel my feet on the ground? Like in any moment, how embodied are you? And
is this a conversation when it comes to embodiment and these 5 pillars? Is this something that someone's supposed to broach with a partner? Is it best to do it with a partner? Is it best to journal it? Is this supposed to be part of my morning meditation practice?
Yes,
what am I doing?
I love this that you're asking this. So I think so. I mean, because I'm getting into the pillars now, but really for couples, this is just, well, first of all, there's a sex IQ quiz that people can take on my website. It's like a figure out where you're at and where to start. But I do this. If I'm not in the mood for sex or I don't want something, I write down the 5 areas and I think about, and I'll journal at the top of my notes in my phone. And I go around, I'm like, have I paid attention to all of these pillars? How's my health and wellness? Have I been working out? What's my blood flow like? Have I been communicating with my partner? That's another one of the pillars is collaboration. Have I talked to you about what my turn-ons are? What makes me feel good in the bedroom? What doesn't? Maybe I have some resentments too. So you just a way of kind of analyzing where you're at, say, your sexual health, and then, figuring out, then talking to a partner about it. So really it's just, you could do this on your own. You could read this with your partner. You could figure out so the first thing is and if you want to start more like at a base level, like if you're in a relationship with someone and you've never talked about your sex life, a great place to start, like if we're just talking quickly, like before we get into the psychological and emotional part of it, and you're like, right now, I want to know what's going on. Talk about the 3 most memorable times you've had sex with each other, not with somebody else. But be like, what's our most memorable times you have sex? And then you look at that and you think, okay, what was happening in those moments? Why was it so great? Was there a new sex move? Was there a lot of foreplay? Was there a lot of build up? Had we not seen each other in a while? Was there a lot of oral sex? Did someone almost walk in the room and we thought we almost got caught? Like what elements were happening so we can kind of reverse engineer what great sex feels like? When did we feel the most connected? What was happening? So that's a great place to start. I have a yes, no, maybe list on my site that lists all of like the 80 sex acts out there that couples can kind of take a little quiz together and figure, this is more like, what are we into? Are we into kissing, spanking, dirty talk? Like what would be great? But at the end of the day, Chris, we have to understand, when do I get turned on? When do I get aroused? What time of month? What time of day? What conditions need to be present for my arousal? Do I need to have it? Like if it's freezing in my house and it's a mess, I am shut down. I have no blood flow. I'm freezing. I'm shivering. I can't relax because the dishes are in the sink. If I'm resentful with my partner because he didn't come home when he said he was going to, or we got in a fight last week, like there's no way that I'm in the mood for sex. If I'm in pain, if I'm having my period, if I'm right. So there's just, and we just think it's some magical switch that's going to flip on at any moment because it did early on in the relationship. So through this book, through these pillars, you can learn at any time. It's kind of like your health. If you're not feeling in shape, you don't just go to the gym. Let's say you want to get in shape, right? You're not going to just go to the gym. You're going to, like, if you want to be healthy, right? You're going to go to the gym. You're going to change your diet. You're going to get your blood work done. Maybe you're going to amp your connections in your community and try to have your mental health. So the sex is the same way, but since we compartmentalize it, we're disconnected from it. I want people to realize there's a holistic approach to understanding your overall wellness, and that includes your sexual health.
Cock blocked by the dishwasher. What a scenario to get yourself into. Yeah, I think that you're right. Not being intentional about sex is it's something that's super common. It's tied into by this shame. It's tied into by the fact that it's more difficult to speak to other people about. You're not going to. I applaud you, and I thoroughly hope that people can have a more organic relationship with talking about sex. But I don't see a world in which I want to open up to my mom about whatever's going on in my sex life. So, given the fact that that's the case, it is one of the more challenging things for you to do. Talking about stuff that gets in the way, what are the most common emotions that get in the way or stop people from having pleasure?
The most common things that get in the way of pleasure. So I call these the pleasure thieves. And the first one is stress, anxiety, stress, worry. If we're in a place where we are worried all the time and anxious, and we're in our heads and we're worried about money, our jobs, our lives, we are not going to be able to prioritize our pleasure and make as much time for it. We're going to be in our heads, which means we're not in our bodies. So that's just a huge factor. And again, I think that people don't often see that connection between their lifestyle and their mental health and their sexuality. There's also shame, as we covered, that if we have shame around our bodies, around our sexuality, around how we show up, thinking that we shouldn't be having sex, it's going to be really hard to have connected, intentional sex. It really is. And then trauma. If we have unhealed trauma, any kind of trauma, big T trauma, little T trauma, that our body is in fight or flight and we are disassociate during sex, also going to make it difficult for having sex. Those are some of the things.
All of these are, well, no, trauma to me feels like something, especially big T trauma, is the sort of thing that it's not just enough to speak to your partner about, right? You probably need to go and
therapy. You need to go and get professional
therapy.
Listen, we all need therapy. We all need, I believe that we all could use therapy at some point in our life. I mean, it's just like getting a second opinion on your life. We do it in our business, right? We get a business coach, or if your car breaks down, we go to the mechanic. Like if our relationship or our mental health, I'm just a huge fan of therapy. I really can't even believe it's something that people still don't realize that they could use. And it doesn't have to be like a traditional once a week therapist. People can find other ways to kind of do that internal work. I just think it's so important. I mean, another thing that's really keeping us from pleasure is medications. I don't think that we realize that antidepressants, birth control pills, some blood pressure medications will directly impact our libido, our blood flow, our ability to get aroused, turned on, erect, lubricated, wet. And so again, the disconnect with lack of information. I mean, no one's reading the side effects on the side of a pill bottle, but they probably should, or maybe they heard it and they're like, oh, but it doesn't really affect me. It absolutely does. And these are also things we have to pay attention to, so you can talk to your doctor about it, your medical doctor, and you can say, I'm not okay with these side effects. Are there other things that I can do?
These SSRIs are causing me to be basically impotent. Have you had Dr. Sarah Hill on your show?
No.
Lady that wrote This Is Your Brain on Birth Control?
No, but I've had a few other birth control people on, but no, I haven't, but I'll write it down.
It'll be similar stuff to what you've seen, but she's phenomenal, and she looks at it through an evolutionary lens, which is great. And she's got some ovulatory window shift stuff in there, which is interesting too. But they did a study with natural cycles, the thermometer under the tongue people. So they actually worked with the company to have an in-app study that was done. All of the women who are on the Natural Cycles app are currently off birth control, because why the fuck would you be tracking a cycle if you're on birth control?
Right.
They surveyed a bunch of the users and asked whether they met their partner when they were on birth control or when they were off birth control. They then asked them to rate their current level of sexual satisfaction with their partner. And I think in the app, there is a journal entry that asks you to put your current level of arousal or like sexual desire or something like that. They were then able to compare the level of sexual satisfaction from women that had met their partners when they were on and are now off, or met their partners when they were off and are now still off. Women who met their partners when they were on birth control and are now off had a lower level of sexual satisfaction with their partner, but both groups had the same level of sexual desire and arousal. So no difference in terms of sex drive, but a marked difference in terms of how much they were attracted to their partner. And you go, okay, has anybody ever told any girl ever when they go and get birth control at age 16 or something, beware that the partner that you end up with, if you then decide to get off birth control, maybe you're married, maybe you've been together for 4 or 5 years and you've never released yourself from this hormone-induced stupor, and you go, holy fuck, I'm in a relationship with somebody that I'm not that sexually compatible with when I don't have a ton of progesterone flowing through me. It's really, it's like terrifying and fascinating.
Yeah, no, it is. I actually talk about the study in the book, and I didn't know. I wonder if it was the same study with Sarah Hill. I don't know that that's the name of it, but this is a known study that's been around that we do talk about a lot, that it's just, there are so many factors that when women take a birth control pill at 16, 17, they don't realize that it's going to impact that they're more at risk for depression, for anxiety, for reduced libido, for concentration problems, diet, for their just everything, like literally
energy levels, weight gain,
everything. Yep. I took the pill for years. I don't remember, and it was almost like a non-pill. Like back now, there's more information. This is why I'm so thrilled. There's so many people talking about this, but I remember going to the doctor. I was on it for 10 years, and they'd be like, are you on any medication? And be like, oh, just the pill. Like it was no one ever talked about side effects ever. It was just, that's what you do. You don't talk. It's just crazy to think now with all the information we have, how harmful it is.
Well, that's one of the pieces of advice that I definitely give to people, which is if you and your partner are thinking about getting married and your missus has been on birth control for the entirety of your relationship, you really, really need to get her to come off this before you commit to buying the house, getting the dog, doing the marriage, starting the family. Because, and it's brutal to say, we are inexorably linked. Our psychology and our biology work in tandem with each other. And you just don't know how different the texture of your partner's mind could be if she comes off birth control and you go, fuck, this doesn't work. And it's a non-zero number of people. It's not an insignificant number of people to whom this happens. So yeah, I think that's important. So going back to the communication thing, someone's listening to this and they go, that's me and my missus. We don't talk about sex as openly as we should do. This sex IQ thing sounds like I've never even considered it. What is the best process for beginning a conversation, opening up this world of talking about sex with your partner?
The best thing to do is to find a space and time to talk about it. I talk about the 3 T's of communication. I have a communication guide on my site. It's like timing, tone, and turf. This is a great tool for any kind of sexual conversation that you want to have, but you want to make sure that you are, first off, that you're entering into these conversations from a place of curiosity and compassion and being intentional, that this conversation is going to be about our collaboration and about us coming together in a place where we want to learn more about each other, rather than defensive. Like, why don't you ever go down on me? Why aren't you initiating sex? There's so much anger and hostility around sex. So timing, tone, and turf is pick a time when you guys are hanging out and it's chill. It's not when you are, not in a good chill space. It's not when you've been fighting or whatever. It's date night. And the
Well,
tone's like,
you're saying that immediately after a rampant argument, saying "Why'd you never go down on me" isn't going to be
exactly.
received
That's
well.
terrible. It does never received well, but people fucking, they
Unbelievable.
throw everything. People throw it in, man. They throw it in at the times that you shouldn't. And then the turf, that's the most important thing to remember, is it's outside the bedroom. People do not have these kind of conversations when you are in the bedroom, when you are in a heightened state of arousal already, or you're upset about something. I would just love everybody to keep their bedrooms for sleeping and for sex.
What about tone?
The tone is light and curious, and it's open, and it's collaborative. And I give a lot of tools in the book for actually, I mean, I give scripts upon scripts, because what I know after 20 years that people are like, I still don't know how to do it. Like, even though I talk about timing, tone, and turf, like, it's light, it's open, you're not defensive, you're learning how to be, I some active listening tools for people to learn how to actually reflective listen. A lot of us, we just don't listen. We talk and we don't actually hear what our partner's saying. So there's methods to repeating back to what your partner says to make sure that you are hearing each other. And the other thing to remember is that it's not a one-time conversation. My vision is for couples to have this conversation all the time. I mean, you don't
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be when your parents are around the table, but when you're like, wherever, because like, you talk about date night, right? Like, what are we going to do tonight? Where are we going to go on our vacation? What don't you talk about your own personal goals or your work goals? And I know my partner and I talk a lot about like what our goals are professionally and personally, and health goals and all those things. But like, we talk about our sex life. Like, we're like, okay, we're going away. What toys should we bring? What should we do? What's our like thing that we're into this week, this month? Should we, like, I know when there's times that I'm turned on or not, or he's like, should we have sex? We literally talk about it, and it's so hot because it's not confused. There's no confusion around my sexuality. There's no like resentments or are we going to have sex? We're not going to have sex, because we're like, just like, are we ordering in? Are we cooking dinner? Are we having sex? Are we not? Like, and then we clear all the confusion and upset stuff around sex, the weirdness and the things. And we just know, like, when we want to do it, it's kind of like going to the gym, like for your workouts, you optimize it. Like, a great hack is to put your shoes out the night before, sign up for your class, have a trainer, keep yourself accountable.
Is that what you're saying? That you leave cues around the house so the butt plug is next to the NutriBullet just in case you want to have sex. Right, fine.
Exactly. And it's always charged.
Sense.
My assistant charges my sex toys. I'm not kidding you. They're always ready to go.
Wow. I hope that you pay your assistant unbelievably well.
They're already clean. She just charges them. Yeah, she organizes my whole life. She charges my laptop. She charges my iPad. Everyone here.
We've got a dock. We've got everything. We've got the AirPods. We've got the butt plug. We've got everything in a nice clean line.
Yeah.
Get tactical for a second. What are some of the favorite scripts that you have for how somebody should broach a discussion about sex with their partner?
Honestly, one of my favorite ways to do it is because that timing, tone, and turf conversation could just be, hey, I realize we've never talked about our sex life. I was listening to this great podcast, and they said that couples who talk about sex actually have better sex. So, because literally people are like, you have to remember this, when you approach your partner, if you've never talked to them about sex, there's a pretty good chance they're going to go into fight or flight. They're going to be like, why are you bringing this up to me? What am I doing wrong? Oh my God, my penis really is as small as I thought, or not as hard, or not. Oh, you don't like my breasts. There's just a million things. We go to this place, not like, oh, great. You want to talk about our sex life? That is, I've been waiting for that too, babe. No, it's usually met with like animosity and fear. So that's why the tone is so important, and the timing, and just saying, listen, I realize that this is something that, we haven't talked about, but I want to have a growth mindset around our sex life. And I hope that you do too. I hope that this can be a place where we can grow and learn together and evolve. Would you be down for that? So that's just the general conversation. But let's say there's something that you really want to, you want to give feedback too. You want to give some constructive feedback. I love the compliment sandwich. The sexual compliment sandwich is when you start with, a compliment. You start with something that you really love about the sex life. Like, oh God, last night was so hot. I love when maybe my desire is to kiss more, right? Do you know that in long-term relationships, kissing is one of the first things that goes. We stop kissing, we stop making out. Remember, like early on, like you have those long makeout sessions and sex lasts a lot longer. Well, maybe I've learned that kissing is a big part of my arousal process. So I would say, I really love the sex we're having. It was so hot last night. I love the way like you slowly undressed me, and it was so the orgasms, and it was that butt plug. You really like used that really well last night, babe. But I realized, and this is when you get to the constructive part, is that I really miss our kissing. And for me, I know we kiss a little bit at the beginning, but I think it would be so hot if we could kind of bring back in some of those makeout sessions. And then you end it with why it would be great for both of you. Because I think the more we kiss, the more connected we're going to feel. And I know I'll be way more turned on and down for more sex. So you just sort of, yeah.
Well, one of the things, I guess, almost everybody has performance anxiety in one regard or another, right? Guys for how long they can last, and girls for whether or not they're doing it right. And I think that trying to work out a way to dampen the landing, to just make it a little bit more gentle is probably pretty important, because you don't want to trigger a response in somebody that worsens the situation. I think that that's one of the reasons that people fear bringing this up is, well, how's my partner going to respond?
Exactly.
I'm trying to improve our sex, but what if I make it worse? What if I make them more self-conscious?
Yeah. Well, I think that if you're in a relationship where you can be super vulnerable about your insecurities and your challenges, and my hope is that everyone's in a relationship where they're able to talk about other areas, like, oh, my boss at work didn't treat me so well today, or I'm feeling I didn't get that raise, or I didn't get that thing, and you're vulnerable. But sex is the same way. So if you have insecurity, hopefully your partner is coming at it from like a loving place. Like if you're giving feedback and you're trying to grow into the sex life and try to evolve it so it's interesting and hot for both of you, that we can take some of the shame and trust and know that your partner is with you because they love you and they're attracted to you and they find you sexy and hot, and that all the things that I want people to take a moment here and really hear what I'm saying, that most of the things that you are worried about when it comes to sex, your performance, your penis size, your body shape, the way you're performing oral sex, the way your breasts, your left boob is bigger than your right boob, or whatever the things you're worried about, have like literally zero to do with any sort of pleasure or satisfaction. And people will tell you they have the best sex. It was never because of like the shape of the penis, all these things. It's about connection. It's about intimacy. It's about feeling safe. It's about experimenting. It's about really being with someone where you want them to have the most pleasure and they want the same for you. It's a collaboration. It's a beautiful dance. And so if I can leave this planet and have people realize that like all of this is okay, you are normal, your fantasies, your desires, it's all fine, that you have to make peace with yourself and then find a partner that's open to collaborate with you on this and have these conversations. Like that's the biggest roadblocks, is our own fears around sex and worry.
What are you hearing from women about what they wish that their partners would do more or less of in the bedroom? I'm aware that this isn't a one size fits all. I'm aware that every woman's body and fantasies are individual, but are there some common trends that you're hearing from women about things that are commonly do's and don'ts, mores and lesses?
I would say that across the board, and this is probably nothing new, that women want more, they want sex to be slower. I say they go 5 times slower than you think. Slow everything down. Kissing, undressing, making out. If you're going down on your partner, like don't be like the one like wonder. Stay down there a little bit longer. If you heard me earlier, it takes women anywhere between 20 and 40 minutes to orgasm. I think that women want slowness. I think they want intentionality. They want compliments. They want to feel adored. They want to feel worshiped. They want to feel beautiful. Compliments go a long way. The brain is our largest sex organ. So, besides our skin, people always get on me for that, but find our skin also is important. So I think that the more that we can connect sexually, I often say foreplay all day, or foreplay starts after the last orgasm. So what can you do in the times in between sex to stay connected and hot and keep it sexy? Whether it's like sexting, sending pictures, telling your partner what you want to do next, what you remember about the last time you had sex, keeping sex top of mind, keeping your pilot light lit. Because when you just like think about it, I'm always going to use the analogy of the gym. Like you start working out every day, you're feeling great, and then you don't go for a while, you don't go for a month, and it's a lot harder to get back in there. The same thing goes for sex. So I think that we all, not just women, remember, we want to keep that fire going. We want to keep it lit. So I think that I just hear that we want more, like we don't want to just be going about our lives and then there's this expectation we should just want to go and have sex because our partner does. So I think that we have to remember that women are slow cookers typically, and men are like frying pans. So if you can just remember that we've got more bells and whistles and buttons and things that have to happen for us to be aroused. Again, not one size fit all. There's some women who feel differently, but overall in my 20 years of work, this is what I've found, that we need a little bit more of everything to keep it hot and keep it interesting and collaborative.
You mentioned about instigating sex, and I think that initiating sex from, all of the, I used to run an events business, so I saw a lot of 18 to 25-year-olds that were in and out of relationships, making up and breaking up and stuff like that. And one of the most common disagreements that was had around sex seemed to be who was initiating it, how it was initiated, communication about trying to start it. A lot of the time, I think girls not instigating, which can sometimes cause guys to feel not desired. That's kind of a bit of a lame thing for a guy to admit to, because you go, well, if I don't feel desired, like, what even is that? That's kind of a bit of a feminine trait that undermines my masculine confidence and essence. That makes me less of an alpha or a high value man. What have you come to believe or learn about instigating sex, philosophically, tactically? What do you think?
I think that we all need to initiate and instigate sex. I think that it has to be a two-way street. I think that I also want to say that I get why usually in relationship, there's one person initiates more than the other. That's just how it is. Usually there's a high desire partner and a low desire partner. And typically those people get together in a relationship. And so one person's always initiating. But what happens is there's just this, what happens is that then they get into this challenge where if you're always the one who's driving everything, it gets exhausting. You're not even sure that your partner wants to. And then they're the one who has the power. The low desire partner has the power in the relationship. They're the one who's deciding, is the sex going to happen? Is the sex not going to happen? So that can be exhausting too, to be like, well, why am I not desired? Why aren't you making an effort? But I think, again, like everything, we get into these patterns, right? We get into patterns and we're like, well, this is how our sex happens. You make the move and I follow. But the challenge around it is, someone feels rejected. They feel like they're doing all the work. They don't know that they're desired. And it does seem like it's a feminine thing, but we all have feelings and emotions and want to feel loved and adored and safe. That is just blurs across gender lines. So the thing about initiation is it's really important to realize that it's a skill set, that you might not be as used to it. You might not have done it and you might not know what it looks like, but it's okay to tell your partner too, because these are the kind of conversations I want people to have. I know that you want me to initiate more. I mean, this could be one of our conversations. If you're in a relationship and say, I feel like, babe, I know I love the sex that we're having, but I feel like I'm always making the effort. And I would love to know that you're down with sex too. Doesn't it ever just strike you? Don't you ever just want to grab me like I grab you? Like I see you, I walk in the door and I want to throw you down in the bed, but you never do that to me. And I would just love if you did. Would you be down with that? Right? Well, you do it in a much more, you wouldn't say never, and you would do it a different way. However, the problem is I might hear that. And to be honest, I will be real here, vulnerable. I'm not the initiator as much. In my entire sexual history, I typically rely on my partner to initiate. But I've had partners say to me, again, it's my life work, but still I need to initiate. So what I've realized is that what I need to do is, it's just not in my habit. I don't get struck by it like my guys do that I'm with. I'm just not that person. I am somebody who is more responsive. I respond to stimuli. So there's people who are spontaneous arousal and responsive arousal. And again, I hate to do this stuff with gender, but usually men are more spontaneous and women tend to be more responsive. So I'm responding to my partner's kiss on my neck. He came in, he grabbed me, he did something, he sent me a sexy text. I'm responding to that. Okay. So knowing that about myself and my partner saying he wants me to initiate more, I had to then do a trip in my brain and say, okay, since I know it's not going to strike me over the head, I have to think about, when am I going to initiate? And then I'll plan it. I'll be like, okay, well, I know that the house has to be clean. The dishes have to be in the dishwasher. It has to be warm. I have to have worked out, feel good, showered. The bed has to be made. My toys are charged. The lube's out, right? I mean, there's things that need to happen. I don't want to do it early in the morning because I don't want to miss my workout. And I got to get up and work out. So and I think that in saying this, hopefully people are thinking about this too, because what I encourage and what smart sex is all about is about getting smart about your arousal, your desire, so you can hack it and you know, like, this is exactly what needs to happen. So then I have to think about it. So that's one thing. I'm like, these are all the things that happen. And then literally another thing to do is saying to your partner, if you're still like, but I still can't do it, I still can't initiate. Another piece of advice I give is ask your partner, thanks for letting me know, babe. I know you want me to initiate more. What would that look like to you? What would a really hot initiation look like? Because maybe in my head's the perfectionist, I'm thinking it has to be like some elaborate thing where I'm like naked on the bed wearing lingerie with rose petals everywhere, right? And maybe I invited another woman over. Like, I don't know what's hot. If that's your fantasy, who knows? But literally, he might be like, I just want you to grab me and just kiss me. I just want you to make out with me. I want you to come behind me in the kitchen, put your arms around me. I want you to send me a naked photo. Like, and then I have some fodder. Then I know. I'm like, oh, that's easy, right? And then it's less fearful. It's less scary. It becomes a habit again. And then you realize that's no big deal. It's literally no big deal. I did it and I'm done. Let's move on to some other sex problems. So it's really, again, I just try to get into the nuanced nitty gritty of where people get stuck. And that's what, after all these years, I realized this is a really common thing. The initiation thing is huge. And the thing is, it might not sound like it's a big deal, but when you realize that when you think you're the only one pulling the sexual weight in a relationship, it builds into resentments. Then those resentments get out of control and there's a lot happening. So let's just nip it in the bud. The second you start having sex with someone is when you should start talking about all of these things, right? And if you haven't yet, that's cool too, but start to understand who you are as a sexual being.
Here's something else that I noticed a lot, especially throughout my 20s, which was conversations that I had with some of my close guy mates about how it was always expected and almost resented, I think, sometimes from the girls if they weren't hot to trot at all times. That there is an expectation that the man is the sexual protagonist and that the woman is the sexual gatekeeper and she's going to respond when you are forthcoming. But that if the reverse happens and you're not immediately just ready to go, or you don't fancy it this evening, or you are whatever, that's much more accepted typically from the woman. You know, you've seen it in a million comedy shows of the guy rolls over and tries to sort of fondle with the girl. And she's like, I'm sleeping. I'm tired tonight. I'm on my period. I'm a blah, blah.
Right.
But the reverse, I don't think that we have a particularly good positioning for guys. There's a lot of shame around that, around, do you know what it is? Like, I had a hard day at work. Like, I don't want to do this. But if I say no, maybe initiation is rarer. Maybe it makes me feel like less of a man. Maybe I've got concerns about performance. If I do try to have sex during a time when I'm not as in the mood for it, that's something that I think is a lot less talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're bringing that up because I want to normalize that too. I mean, my heart goes out to men. Men have so much pressure. They're supposed to be turned on, ready to go, hard, erect, making the moves, and then knowing exactly what they're doing to turn their partner on and doing all the tips and tricks. And sometimes guys are not in the mood for sex just as much as women are. And in fact, I found, again, to go back to this, that I've heard from just as many women who want more sex than their male partners. So I just want to normalize that as well, that's really, really, really common. And so, just having compassion for your partner if they don't want it. Again, this is where the normalizing the sex conversation comes in. If in just understanding that just because your partner doesn't want to have sex tonight, it can be not tonight. It doesn't mean not ever. It doesn't mean not now. And then putting some words around it and say, babe, you know what? Tonight, I've had a long day. I'm not feeling it, but I can't wait for this weekend. Like Saturday night, like let's do something. Let's go out, just the two of us. So then your partner's feeling a little bit less, rejected or less, attached to that outcome. I just think that we don't, again, put words around it. And then we create all these stories, in our head. If we could just kind of say, not now. You just like, here's why. And let's talk about it later. Let's do it later.
Looking at the reverse of this, what are the most common reasons that you hear from women about why they're not reaching orgasm during sex?
Usually, during penetration, if we're talking about that, penetrative sex typically does not hit women where they need to be hit. Their clitoris is external and internal, but the orgasm starts with the clitoris being, the most common orgasm is a clitoral orgasm, which is, women being touched. Usually the majority of orgasms are going to happen from a fingers, a mouth, or toys. That's how the female orgasm happens. So women aren't having orgasms when it's just penetration without any foreplay or orgasm or pleasure or stimulating the clitoris beforehand, because you're just missing all the hot spots. Like the inner third of the women's vagina is the most sensitive. And so those are some of the areas we need to pay attention to. And so that's one reason, is that we don't really know how to advocate for that. We don't know how to move during sex. Now, penetrative sex could elicit an orgasm if we had more stimulation first, if we used a toy, if we used fingers, then we could have one in conjunction with penetration. So I would say just really about understanding our anatomy and how it all works is one factor. Another thing is, just, I guess, not having, well, it's kind of the same thing, but not having enough build up, not having enough arousal, not having enough foreplay. And then it could be also medications, birth control pill. Here's another one. Never having one before with a partner, but just having one during masturbation. So that's like a new, everyone's body is different. So it's not feeling safe with a partner, not feeling that I'm with a partner that I can actually communicate my needs and let them know that these are the steps that need to happen. So
one of the most interesting stats that I'd seen about this was initiated by the declining rates of not having an orgasm compared with how many times you've had sex with that person. So I think it's like 80% of women don't have sex on the first date, or the first time that they have sex, not on the first date. And then it like relatively reliably declines as you get with somebody more. Now, there's something going on, physically you can start to communicate more about compatibility and blah, blah, blah. But really what that suggests is that it's more about comfort. It's more about feeling relaxed. It's more about being comfortable with the partner that you're with. And I saw a really fascinating study, this is a little while ago now, that said the most common reason for women not reaching climax during sex was recursive self-thoughts about not reaching climax during sex.
Yeah. Our head, absolutely. That makes, we're in our heads, performance anxiety. Am I not going to orgasm? Am I not going to orgasm? I think I'm going to orgasm. Is it not going to happen? So absolutely. And the same thing goes for men and their erections or their orgasm. The same thing. Am I going to get hard? Am I going to come too quickly? Oh shit. Am I going to come? So yes, when we are in our heads during sex, the blood is leaving our genitals and going to our brains to fuel all of these thoughts that are not serving us and that are not advocating for our pleasure at all. So the worry that we're not going to get there, which is why I teach a lot of mindfulness.
I was going to say meditation.
Meditation. I'm telling you, meditate and learn the skill set of bringing yourself back to the present moment. And I also give a lot of tools in Smart Sex to how to bring yourself back to the moment during sex, so you can be present, so you can breathe, so you can connect with your partner. I mean, there have been times too where I'm just, and I give these examples too. It's like sex sometimes starts to happen and you lose your way. You're like, you're in your head, or you're like, did I turn the oven off? And it's okay. Like, here's the other thing. Sex is not so precious. You're allowed to say, you know what? Let's stop for a second. I'm going to run to the bathroom, or I'm going to do something, or let's breathe for a minute. Sometimes again, it's just going and I'm like, oh God, I'm not here. I'm not present. I've left the building. And then I'll just stop and I advocate for this. I'll do this in my relationship. I'll say, can we just look at each other and breathe? Can we just do 5 deep breaths where our inhales or our exhales are a little bit longer than our inhales, and we breathe and we look into each other's eyes, and then we reset and then you start again. So I think, again, this misinformation that sex is sort of a sprint and not a marathon, and that it's very linear. We make out, we take our clothes off, we have sex, is just not the case. And it makes it so less fun.
Emily Morse, ladies and gentlemen, if people want to check out the stuff that you do, where should they go?
Everything is Sex with Emily. I release a podcast called Sex with Emily twice a week. In all my social media, Sex with Emily, and my new book is Smart Sex. You can buy it wherever you buy books. And you can take my Sex IQ quiz on my website. That will allow you to know where to start on your sexual journey.
Emily, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Appreciate you too. Thanks for having me.
What's happening, people? Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that episode, then press here for a selection of the best clips from the podcast over the last few weeks. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.